Thanks for joining me today. My name is Tim DeSetti with Infinitas. Wanted to share with you a presentation I did last week for one of our clients on managing debt. I don't think it would come as a surprise to you that while our country is deeper in debt because of the COVID crisis, and I think we're going to have a pretty big political battle here this summer over whether we continue to raise our debt ceiling, individuals also face many issues with debt. And so I wanted to present to you today some concepts on both good debt, bad debt, how we should use debt to our advantage, as well as when we get into debt difficulties, what we can do about managing that. So I'll call your attention to the presentation today, and I want to thank you for joining me. I talked about the fact that there's good debt and bad debt. Obviously, when we utilize debt for a mortgage on a home and we buy that home properly, we obviously have an asset that can appreciate over a long period of time. That's clearly an asset that we would, or a debt that we would consider a good thing. Obviously, we can get into debt with things that depreciate in value. Unfortunately, we all need a car to get to work for the most part, and so buying a car sometimes as a necessity at a high interest rate can be a necessity, but it can also get the best of us because that asset continues to depreciate in value. The worst kind of debt, and many of us are facing debts for things like credit cards, monthly spending, whether that be a necessity or a spending mistake. When those things tend to build up on us at high interest rates, certainly those are the assets that depreciate the fastest and are definitely categorized as bad debt. I do want to take a minute and distinguish between and help you understand how interest is calculated, because how interest factors into the things that you purchase really is important. We talked about a good debt being a mortgage. One of the drawbacks to a mortgage is the way that interest rates are assessed, I guess is the best term I would use, the way they assess interest rates on a mortgage. As this chart will show you, over the life of a 30-year mortgage in this example, you can see that this is simply just an illustration to show you that interest that's assessed, while it's a level interest across the entire mortgage, most of that interest is stacked towards the front of the mortgage. Sometimes I'll have clients or participants approach me and they'll say, hey, look, I've been paying extra against my mortgage. And I'll ask them when the mortgage began. And if they said, oh, I just started this mortgage 2 years ago and I've been paying extra towards the mortgage. Well, then I give them, obviously that's a gold star moment. Anytime you can pay extra at the beginning of a mortgage, you can have a significant impact in the total interest cost. Because again, of this chart, the majority of your interest is stacked towards the front. So that can have the biggest impact by paying early. I have other clients come to me and say, hey, I only have 4 years left on this 15-year mortgage, for example, or 5 or 6 years left on this 30-year mortgage. And I'm really seeing the end of the finish line, and I want to go ahead and just take money either out of my IRA or out of one of my savings accounts, and I want to pay off the $40,000, for example, that I owe. And then in those situations, I try to discourage them from paying down a mortgage interest because, again, by the chart, you've already paid the vast majority of the interest you'll pay. And you're not necessarily on free money from the mortgage company, but they certainly want to use that behavioral urgency to pay off your debts to their advantage. And so I often encourage those clients not to try to pay off a debt late in the cycle when it's structured the way mortgages are structured. Contrast that with the way that a straight line amortization would work. A good example of this would be a car loan. If you have a car loan and it's a 5-year loan at 6% interest, every single year you're simply going to be charged 6% on what your outstanding balance is. Does it still make sense to pay that off early? Absolutely. The earlier you are in the loan, the more impact you can have. But as time goes on, really just however much you owe is how much you pay interest on. There's no stacking of the interest and no benefit to delaying the payment out on the backside like we would see in a mortgage. So again, if you want more advice on that, definitely talk to me, about or one of our other coaches and advisors here at Infinitas. We can discuss the type of loan you have and how you want to handle that. Then it comes down to, I think there's a national talk show host. I won't advertise for him. He's done a great job in this country of teaching people about debt and how to particularly get out of credit card debt or any kind of high interest debt that you might be facing, whether that be a student loan or a home equity line of credit. There's two primary methods. That particular author and speaker prefers a snowball approach, and let me contrast those for you. A snowball is kind of just like it sounds. When we used to make a snowman when we were a kid, we always started out with a very small amount, and then we let that escalate as we rolled that up. Snowball debt management is just the first step in that process is, of course, list the debts that you have. And what you do is you find the smallest amount you owe. Let's say that you have two credit cards, for example, and one of them you owe $1,000 and the other one you owe $5,000. Regardless of the interest rate on those credit cards, the snowball approach would be to take the smallest debt and pay that off first. It's a behavioral issue. Accomplishing the task of paying off that entire credit card is a momentum factor, and it can lead us to being better about paying down our debts. That does not necessarily mean that mathematically that's the right solution. I tend to favor the avalanche approach, which is to say, in that same scenario, if I had a $5,000 debt and a $1,000 debt, I want to look at the interest rate associated with those two debts. Whichever one is the higher interest rate, that's the one I want to attack first, because that's costing me the most per month to not be able to pay it off. Understand that in both of these scenarios, what you're doing is you're paying the minimum every month, but you're applying all of your extra all of your extra cash flow towards one approach or the other. So hopefully that makes sense. The first step in either one of these processes is really just get a list of the debts that you owe. It could be a student loan, a car loan, it could be a credit card debt. And if that's the case, we want to list those out. We want to be very aware of exactly what our minimum payment is, because on every debt, you need to be sure to pay your minimum payment. And then what we'll do is we'll focus our attention on either that snowball or avalanche approach, whichever one makes the most sense to you. Again, something you can consult with our team on if you'd like to approach that. And then finally, in order to have that extra cash flow, one of two things has to exist. We either have to reduce spending so that we have extra cash flow to attack the debt, or we have to find a way to make more income so that we can attack the debt. I want to share with you a couple ideas. I read lots of blog posts, I watch podcasts, I read articles, I listen to other advisors who coach people on debt, and these are just a couple of ideas that might stimulate some momentum for you. One of which I have practiced myself, and I'm kind of vow to continue to practice on my own, which is what I call a 3-color review. I get out my highlighters. I have a green, a yellow, and a red highlighter. And what I do is I go through my credit card bill each month. That's how I do my spending. Some people, you might go through your actual checking account statement, because that's the way you pay your bills. Either way, whether it's a credit card that you use, a checking account, or a combination of the both, go through that, and line by line, I take that green highlighter and I highlight any bill or any expense that I know is either an absolute necessity, like my home, groceries, gasoline, or insurance. I highlight those green because those have to exist. I take the yellow highlighter and I highlight things that are, well, I would call them optional. They're things that I like, things that I want to continue to do, like going out to eat, going to the movies, different forms of entertainment. I highlight those yellow because those are things, yellow indicates a caution. They're things that I should be cautious about if I'm building up debt and spending more than I make. And so I want to raise my own consciousness and make decisions about whether I perhaps should eliminate those. And then I also take that red highlighter and I go through and I identify a couple of things. One, we all make spending mistakes. So we buy that thing that we really feel like we wanted, but we really did not need. And when we look back on actually owning it, it just doesn't have the polish or shine that we thought it really should have. And so I want to highlight those things, not because in some cases I can't undo that mistake, but I also want to learn from my mistakes so that I'm more conscious about my spending in the future. And then another thing that this past month I highlighted was one of the subscriptions I had. I realized that I was subscribed to a service that I really was no longer using. And so I took a red highlighter, I highlighted that, and actually immediately I picked up the phone to their customer service number and I canceled that subscription. And so it was a really healthy exercise that helped me start to free up some cash. And if I needed that to pay down debt, I certainly would have used that money for that mistake. So I would encourage you to take that 3-color approach and practice that regularly on a monthly basis. Maybe you spend the next 3 months and each month go through your spending and be more judicious about putting one color or another on your spending. Another way that I heard a podcast recently, I really loved this idea, which was to take just 1 week and do a fast from spending. I tried it this past week and I didn't succeed. So I will tell you that I tried to say this past week that I wasn't going to go out to eat a single time over the course of the entire week. I was going to bring my lunch to work every day. I was going to not be lazy, so to speak, and not make dinner for myself for every night of the week. And I think I made it 4 or 5 days, but I certainly didn't make it through the whole week. I did spend a lot less time on Amazon trying not to purchase anything that I didn't need. So if you can succeed at a fast from spending for 1 week, then try to practice that over a couple of weeks and maybe even set a month where you don't spend any extra money on any particular item. Making a monthly fast like that can make a huge difference in your ability to perhaps find that extra, maybe $500 or $1,000 to really make a big dent in a debt problem that you're currently facing. So I want to bring your attention to those 2 ideas. But the other side of the equation, if you can't reduce spending or if that doesn't get you far enough, is to increase your income. I'd remind you that 45% of Americans have what we call a side hustle or a side gig, right? There's so many different ways. I was recently talking to another 401k participant, and they indicated that they work from home 2 days a week. And they have an immediate neighbor that's a longtime neighbor and a very close friend that they definitely have to go into the office every day, and they have 2 dogs. They take those dogs to a daycare because they can't come home during the day to let the dogs out. And it costs a significant amount of money on those 5 days a week to put their dogs into doggy daycare, so to speak. So what this employee did was offered to have the neighbor pay half as much to them to have them let those dogs out once or twice a day and take care of the basic needs. It took very little time from that employee's schedule while they were working from home, and it created a nice savings to the neighbor and on the expense side, and it created a nice little side income for that particular person. And they've used that to kind of tackle some debts that they're facing. So I thought that, there's 1,000 different side hustles you can do out there, but I thought that was a brilliant use of your time. Last year, I actually was at work late, and I found myself, I had forgotten that I had taken my car in for service that morning very early. So being stranded here at work at 6 o'clock at night, I picked up my phone and I dialed up Uber. The Uber driver that took me to the auto dealership was a Black & Veatch engineer. Every day when he got off of work, he had a 40-minute commute to the north part of Kansas City from the south side of Kansas City. And every day he turned his Uber on for just 30 minutes to see if someone wanted a ride from South Kansas City to North Kansas City, where our airport is located. Number one, he made money. He made more than enough money every month by just picking up 5 or 6 days a week where someone needed a ride up to where he already lived. And number two, a 40-minute commute every day was a pretty boring ride for him. So it gave him 5 or 6 new people every month that he would meet that give him some entertainment on his drive home. So be creative. There's 1,000 ways that you could make a little extra money on the side to tackle a potential debt in your situation. And then the final idea I would leave you with is, if you're really having trouble saving for your emergencies and getting money set aside, one participant shared an idea with me that they actually increase their federal tax withholding intentionally. They have more withheld out of their check than they need to, so that they get a refund every April when they file their taxes. This replenishes their emergency savings fund, and gives them, a boost every year. So again, I've heard 100 different ideas. We can only share a few with you today. I'd remind you to check your credit regularly. Managing your own credit score is a really important thing to do. Credit Karma and different entities like that. This is certainly not an endorsement for any one service, but I know many of them will give you the opportunity to say, what would a debt consolidation look like? If you do have some high interest credit cards and you're looking at consolidating, I think they can give you a free view of what it would potentially look like if you could reduce your interest rate with a debt consolidation. So again, making sure you're monitoring all those things on your credit score that could damage your debt, your data and your credit score. And then finally, making you aware that almost all states have a consumer credit agency. A consumer credit agency is a nonprofit or a .org type entity, and for a very, very small fee, they can both put you through some educational programs and they can work directly with you on a credit card or a student loan, for example, and they can give you direct input on some approaches you can take to reduce your debts. I hope that this has been helpful today. If there's any questions you have about managing debt, everyone's situation is unique and different. And so I would encourage you to reach out to our Infinitas team. Our contact information is here. This is the main number to our participant service center. We're always catching those messages as they come in and answering that live whenever possible. So if you have an advisor you'd like to talk to on the Infinitas team, again, go to the website, reach out to us individually, or here's our main contact number where you can call in, and we'd be glad to guide you through whatever you're facing. Again, thank you for joining us today.